So this week on the podcast, we're doing something a little bit different. We are focusing on an interview we've done with a senior researcher at the Turing Institute called Sam Stockwell. He's done some research looking at how AI is being used to spread misinformation after what he calls crisis events.
Welcome to Married to the Machine with Professor David Reid, Stephanie Power, and us, the AIs. Episode 10, Inside the Misinformation Machine, in conversation with the Turing Institute.
I work within a team called the Centre for Emerging Technology and Security, or CETAS. We sit within what's called the Defence and National Security part of the Alan Turing Institute.
I just wanted to talk about Alan Turing a little bit. A year, maybe 2 years ago, I was working on a podcast series called Legacy. The series looks at characters from history over 4 episodes, and my job was to write the dramatic scenes. And I was doing Alan Turing. To write a dramatic scene, you kind of have to read a lot. And just one story that I just really remember, I don't know if you know it or not, but when he went to school, a private school in Sherborne in Dorset, he didn't really fit in. And part of the reason he didn't really fit in was because he was really interested in maths.
Algebra? This is religious instruction, isn't it, Turing?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So do we do algebra in religious instruction?
No, sir.
No, sir. And what do we think about the sciences, Turing?
They're low cunning, sir.
Yeah, it sounds pretty horrendous.
Do you know much about Alan Turing's life? Is that part of what you do when you start working there? Do you do a kind of...
You know what? No, I actually didn't think whether it would be good to watch the Imitation Game and say that I watched it on my interview, but they said, unfortunately, it doesn't get you extra brownie points.
It's also highly inaccurate as well.
This is what I mean. No, I mean, he's got a very fascinating life, obviously, personal life, and also kind of his contributions to mathematics, computer science, the Turing test as well, still being kind of in use today in many respects to sort of try and understand where we are on the scale of AI innovation. So I've got a huge amount of respect for him as a person. Obviously very lucky and honoured to work for an organisation named after him.
Can you just describe a little bit about what you do and what area you look at?
I don't work with coding and data science. I actually work within a team that is mostly comprised of social scientists. So all of us come from a more sort of mixed methods background, areas like politics, history, and those types of subjects. And what we try and do is to help understand how AI is transforming social aspects when it comes to national security. We publish public-facing reports that tries to sort of make these issues a bit more accessible. But crucially, what we try and do is also create kind of policy recommendations that we send to the UK government, for example, regulators like Ofcom and the Electoral Commission, industry as well, so social media platforms, AI companies, to try and help them understand where there might be gaps in their policies or their approaches to AI development or regulation.
The policy thing's really interesting because what we've found, I mean, we've only done a few episodes so far, but whatever we talk about, the natural place to end is, well, what's the policy on this? And I think quite often the answer is there isn't any policy.
No, I think what I quite enjoy about our particular setup is that obviously we work very closely with data scientists and coders who are designing the systems, which is amazing because we get to draw on their expertise in that area. But I think people often forget that that's only one side of the equation. Yes, you've got the actual design and development of the technology, but then how you actually implement that in society, how you manage the risks, who's accountable when things go wrong, what safeguards are you putting in place to ensure that people aren't potentially vulnerable to different risks from these systems.
Because the technology is increasing so rapidly, it must feel like you're always playing catch up with developing policies because all of a sudden the attack parameters that the attacks, so that like vectors get bigger all of the time. Sometimes I am working in university, sometimes they basically have an AI policy and it's set in stone. And that's it. That's the AI policy. And they don't realize that the technology is moving on so rapidly that it's very often out of date very, very quickly.
What we're trying to sort of encourage is actually focusing more on how the technology is being used, because yes, of course, new use cases could emerge, but I think it's becoming a lot easier to understand, for example, how people who are looking to cause harm through AI are trying to actually use those systems, and thinking more about how you regulate that misuse so that you can future-proof somewhat more effectively that type of policy. But of course, I think the other point, as you mentioned, is that even if you go down that route, you're still going to find little gaps or vulnerabilities that emerge over time.
The thing that we were going to talk to you about today is this relatively recent report that you've put out about AI-created misinformation following big crisis events. You didn't just look at one event, but the one that I was particularly interested in was the attacks in Southport. I was sent to Southport that day by the Today programme for Radio 4. It was just really, obviously it was a terrible day. The road had been cordoned off at one end and then at another. And it was kind of eerily silent apart from police and these people sort of floating around, like not many people. When I tried to speak to them, they thought they were reporters. I had one guy who was saying to me, when I said I was working for the BBC, he said, she's got an internet blocker in her bag. She works for the BBC. He started looking through my bag. You're just surrounded by conspiracy theorists. Thought I'd get away from him, and I went down to the other end of the road, the cordon, and this woman really wanted to speak to me, and she said, do you know who did it? And I said, well, no, when the police give out a name, no one's given out a name. And she said, we know who it is. Basically an imagined person with a Muslim name. When I looked at your report, I just thought she is the human at the end of a chain being manipulated.
I think Southport is a perfect case of what we were looking at when we sort of call these crisis events. What we mean here is kind of any event that is, for example, like a national security crisis or emergency. And they're really difficult to deal with because they can take us completely by surprise, as obviously Southport did. And obviously the facts, as you've kind of mentioned already, can take time to be established. So the police might be waiting until they have confirmation of the details on the suspects, but that doesn't stop people naturally wanting to search for answers. Unfortunately, we do see people exploit those types of what we call information voids to cause harm. And what we found was that essentially there was this website that had been uncovered by a lot of journalists at the time called Channel 3 Now, and what looked like a news website, but essentially was a guy in Pakistan who had created this website to look like a breaking news platform. What we basically found was that he was one of the first people who actually created this claim that the name of the suspect had been confirmed and his demographic profile had been confirmed, which obviously later turned out to be false. What was not covered as much was that actually this program, or this platform rather, was actually using what we call in the report an AI news aggregation tool. So this is basically a kind of AI agent, like an autonomous agent that you can program to look up trending topics and keywords on social media, queries that people are asking about a certain topic, scrape all that data and then repackage it into what looks like a really polished breaking news article. And it was also clearly geared towards sensationalist headlines. It took 6 hours, I think, for that Channel 3 Now to produce that story, which is way before the police had confirmed the suspect or the traditional kind of media outlets had put anything out there. That was then amplified and went viral off the back of the types of groups that were trying to mobilize people onto the street. And that obviously then helped to contribute to the riots. I think what was really concerning there, though, was that actually this person in Pakistan, it turned out, didn't really have any malicious intent to cause the type of harm that happened. But what crucially he was looking to do was make a bit of money. These tools allow people to get quite a bit of passive income from the fact that, you know, the more social media clicks you get, the more ad revenue you're going to bring in. Unfortunately, in this case, the person in question had no regard for what it meant in terms of those real world consequences. And that's where I think there's probably more focus needed on what actually are the methods that these individuals are using, because obviously you can try and focus on blocking or suspending the accounts, but then there'll just be others that will crop up and use the same tools, because there's that monetization aspect in particular that is very attractive.
Yeah, I can generate things so quickly and targeted so precisely that it's very difficult to pin down.
We saw kind of what are known as bot accounts. So these are basically fake automated accounts that look like real human users, but actually they're just designed to promote content, and they've got no regard for factual accuracy or what they're doing. But often we see that they're typically used in, for example, elections by foreign hostile states who are trying to interfere with democracy. So what they do is they use the accounts to flood social media with certain narratives that might look like they're authentic or credible if more people are kind of spreading them. Again, in Southport, the police were reporting, but it went very sort of under the radar that there might have been some bot activity also amplifying that fake name and the narrative over the suspect's ethnicity. So
just for people who don't really understand how this works, say you're on YouTube and you get lots of clicks, you're automatically paid for that.
yes.
So the more outlandish you can be, or the more outlandish you can hope that your AI is, the more money. You're just pulling in cash.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah,
And-
it comes down
Oh,
to
go on.
the dead internet theory as well, isn't it? If these things will grow so massively, in the end, the internet will be completely useless.
No, it's becoming incredibly hard for people to know the difference just by looking at your phone.
We were at an event the other day and somebody said, you can tell when it's a fake AI. I could see Dave in this event just like shaking his head because you can tell the rubbishy fakes. But I mean, what would you say to someone who said, oh, well, you can tell it's AI?
I mean, it really depends on like the software they're using, how skilled they are. There was like a quite sophisticated example from the Irish election that happened last year, where one of the candidates was supposedly dropping out of the race. You had an RTE News, which is like the official Irish broadcaster, a logo, AI generated, a news anchor who was actually from the organisation Deepfakes on it. And then you had the candidate herself looking like she was announcing she was withdrawing. All seamless, polished. I'd be amazed if that person who made that comment would be able to tell me whether that was AI generated or not without knowing. The other thing is to say that it's only just going to get more sophisticated as the technology improves. I mean, there's an incentive for the AI companies to make their content as realistic as possible because they have benefits from doing that for things like artistic purposes. And so they're going to want to patch any of those kind of outliers that help people to know whether it will or will not be AI generated.
We did something on that. Catherine Connolly is pulling out of the race. If it had been the BBC, I might have been able to see it a bit more.
It is with great regret that I announce the withdrawal of my candidacy and the ending of my campaign.
No, Catherine!
Some of my colleagues in the media team for our latest report, as part of our sort of promotional content for it, actually deepfaked me into a video that looked like I was protesting. The fact that they were able to spin that out in about an hour just also shows anyone can be a potential victim, right? It doesn't have to just be a celebrity or a politician. It could be any one of us. And, you can be put in some really compromising situations, which makes it even more kind of controversial and worrying, basically.
So say with an example of something like Southport, an event that means there's a Cobra meeting. What's your proposal for who the AI fake spotters going to be and what on earth can they do about it?
We've actually sort of simulated a AI-driven incident similar to what you could imagine. Let's say if a Southport happened again, but this time every single bit of misinformation was AI generated. So you had deepfakes, you had bots, you had AI news aggregators all causing havoc. What the hell will we do in that scenario? There was a bit of uncertainty about what kind of government department would lead on that response. How would they contact the AI companies to discuss, how their tools were being weaponized or misused? What we would like to see is a bit more of an effort to try and connect up with those companies. Because also we know that they're not particularly kind of well established, right? Compared to the social media platforms that have been around for 10 or 15 years, maybe even longer, AI is still quite a new and novel technology in the state it is currently. And many of the companies that you're sort of having to deal with probably haven't really had time to establish those networks with, relevant teams within law enforcement and government. So we really think it's about trying to ensure that they have those threat intelligence, knowledge sharing routes so that, in the middle of one of these crises, if they were to ever happen moving forward, you could very quickly connect up the dots with the right people. You could share relevant bits of information or evidence, try and understand how to sort of prevent it or to sort of mitigate it.
It sounds like a group of experts needs to be on call for when anything like this happens, so that the first thing they could do is do the thing that you have done since about Southport, but that's got to be done within. Is that a job for the Turing Institute? I mean, who's doing that? Nobody.
So actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because actually during Southport, what this parliamentary inquiry into the role of social media and misinformation found was that actually quite a few of the social media companies have set up what they were calling crisis command centers. So these were basically spun up after the riots were emerging, and they were designed to bring together different teams within the company into sort of one place. So it was almost like a war room, you might want to call it that. And you had technical experts, policy experts, all monitoring what was going on their social media platforms. You had different types of experts looking at the same problem all in one place, so they could very quickly figure out what was going on, what might we need to do to mitigate what's happening in terms of the risk, but then also being plugged into government as well, so they could share that information very quickly. Unfortunately, it seems like that's at the moment a bit of an informal thing, ad hoc thing that, if they want to set them up, they can. So actually what we were advocating in the report is that they actually formalise that as an official policy, so that, for example, if we did see another Southport event, you would have that immediately set up. I think at the moment, because you're looking at so many different teams and so many different parts of the organisation trying to communicate and connect up with each other, otherwise it just becomes a lot slower. It becomes a bit more of a catch-up game.
We would talk about AI taking people's jobs, but there's so many jobs there for people to get involved with. You can imagine you have a vast array of people who'll be able to analyse that from all sort of different angles, really. You have social linguists, graphic artists, people get psychologically social engineered.
During Southport, again, a couple of academics had created this data analytics platform, which basically tried to classify where in the country some of these narratives were coming from, trying to geographically map where some of those really harmful narratives were emerging or were concentrated in, where you could see little flare-ups across the country. You could imagine in the future that kind of tool could be really valuable in understanding, okay, if let's say we've got a really bad hotspot, maybe we should think about focusing some of that strategic communication on trying to diffuse some of that potential violent narrative, or potentially if people are sounding like they're going to go out onto the streets and mobilise.
What I'm sort of imagining a future scenario where you've got, I mean, it wouldn't be very funny, but you've got a hotspot and you just send the UK's future version of ICE agents straight. I mean, actually,
the truth bots in.
Truth bots.
The AI officers,
start designing truth bots, Dave.
There is a debunk bot trained on different conspiracy theories across different types of topics, hundreds of thousands of data sources around conspiracy theories, but crucially was also trained on really effective rebuttals. They did a test in the US with about 2,000 people who actually expressed they have a belief in different conspiracy theories, like, there was no such thing as the moon landing and JFK's assassination was an inside job. And they found that actually after having put them through that engagement with this chatbot, it actually reduced their likelihood in believing those conspiracy theories by about 20%. Sounds quite like a small change, but you think it's something, at least in terms of maybe getting people to think, okay, maybe I could do a bit more research into that particular kind of topic. Yeah, maybe I do need to think about other types of theories around what's happened during that event.
What you're talking about is a formalised tech cobra.
No, I mean, we do try and engage, obviously, with bits of government, the sort of tech companies that might be relevant for the type of recommendations that we're making. And generally, they are very receptive to discussing them further. I think it's obviously challenging, though, to sometimes see them follow through with it, whether that's just because of lack of resources or capacity to do so. In other cases, sometimes they feel quite strongly about their particular ways of doing things and don't believe that there is a need to change the approaches, which is obviously they're very valid to have those kind of views. And so for us, I think part of it is trying to explain why we came to those conclusions, show them the kind of evidence of what we found, and hope that that kind of combination of approaches can sort of hammer home the points of why we kind of made these recommendations in the first place. It's fundamentally, we're not there to kind of catch anyone out. We just want to try and think of ways that we can improve public safety protection and sort of ensure that these tools are used in a way that is responsible and unsafe, even though, they have their flaws.
In your report, you've used real life examples, and of course this is always the way. Policy doesn't really change until something tragic happens.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, it tends to be those it's too little too late until something really kind of impactful happens. That's also why I think we wanted to do this report, because we did see a lot of these case studies. I think we found in the end about 15 different incidents that have happened since Southport where we have seen these types of AI threats emerge. And yet, unfortunately, still not really much being done to understand how we can address them in future crises. And even, in the case of this year, we've seen it kind of unfold in, for example, like the military intervention from the US in Venezuela, the Iranian protests as well. Again, AI was kind of used in both of those incidents. And it's probably going to be a feature moving forward. I think the more we can raise awareness now and try and sort of create those foundations for societal resilience in the here and now will kind of hopefully make us more protected.
Basically, at the moment, it's basically about information and keeping the information clean. But as AI becomes more and more integrated into systems themselves, they can actually physically do things and interact with physical devices. And so this need's going to become ever more important. Can you imagine if the computer on a Tesla car gets hacked into by something on a large scale, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, and obviously there's all things around like AI analytics for health information. If that gets compromised, that's a lot of personal information that could potentially be leaked or ransomed. And you think about similar scenarios with banks and financial institutions, you're looking at a whole range of risks that fall outside of just information disorder and misinformation and disinformation. You're looking at other really serious impacts on society as well.
Out of everything he said there, Dave, what is it that particularly was interesting to you? We've got local elections in May. How much of a big deal might this be?
I think it's going to be a very big deal. It's not just deep fakes that involve videos and stuff like that. It's the way it can be targeted to nudge people in a specific direction, I think, is particularly important, particularly worrisome, really. So you could actually look at their specific trigger points using AI and try to nudge them in a specific direction. Now, that could be used for good. Nudge can be used for good, improving people's health and so forth, but it can also be used for nefarious purposes as well, or a bit more worrying purposes, particularly in the political environment.
Can you give me like an example? Give us an EG, because I feel like I can't quite picture it.
So it could be that there's, a nuclear power plant being built, and there's a lot of kickback from that, or some people might be for it in some way. You could basically mobilise that strength of feeling for that particular area more easily using AI.
That is assuming that any political parties have got the nous to do that, and I'd argue that possibly they haven't.
No, but you could do it the other way as well. Russian farms that do exactly the opposite. So if they want to try to influence our politics, they can put disinformation out there to do precisely that. You can see where there's particular trigger points where it might sort of like make people a lot more angry or vote in a specific way, and force people to vote in a way that they want them to vote. Not political parties doing it, but outside influencers doing it.
So you're talking about outside influences maybe teaming up with a political party to try to push an agenda in a certain way.
It's a possibility, yeah.
On top of that, that's what Sam was saying about how easy it is to create fake news,
Exactly. It's very easy to make fake information nowadays. The worrying thing is that I read a report many years ago, actually. If people are fed fake information, even though when they're told that information was fake, it'll still influence the way they think, because it takes cognitive energy to change your mind. So once you've been shown something, it sticks.
I think one of the things that I was most concerned about really from this report is that we'd asked him to focus on Southport because that's close to us, and I had gone there on the day of the attacks. What sounded worrying was if there's a whole load of AI influence, misinfluence, if that's a word, there isn't really an organised response to it.
Yeah, it's very piecemeal at the moment. All the different organisations are basically setting up their own. He called them war rooms, didn't he? And they've all got their own war rooms, but those war rooms aren't actually communicating with each other. So it's a bit sort of like all over the place at the moment. I think what the thing he was trying to say, that he said that they should be coordinated, these war rooms, so you have a unified response to some of these situations, which makes sense.
So maybe what we ought to do is just keep a watch during the local elections and see how often AI is used for wrong reasons.
It might be it's too late by the time you detect it. It might have changed people's minds. Once your mind's changed, your mind's changed. It doesn't matter if you later on prove that that was actually a bit of fake news if you voted. I've been talking quite a lot recently about how education, both at the school level and at the higher education level, is essentially industrial in the way it's taught. It harks back to Victorian times, really. We stand in front of a class of people and spout off the same information to 30 or 40 different pupils. Now, it could be that politics is facing the same dilemma. The way we do politics is almost industrial, almost Victorian, where we essentially try to influence people en masse using one voice. Nowadays, because of AI, we've got many voices that can actually individualise the message to try to get across to individual people, so it can be a lot more nuanced. That's going to be a challenge for the future.
You've been listening to Married to the Machine, presented by Professor David Reid and Stephanie Power. Recording, mixing and editing by Stephanie Power. Additional material and music by Matt Power. Remember, always double-check your sources.